Whenever you're ready, Dan, I think we can start. Oh, okay, we're on. Excuse me. So welcome everybody to the Community Resources and Tourism Committee. I will now call the meeting to order. Roll call, looks like everybody's present here today. So we'll have approval of the minutes.
I'd like to move approval.
All right. Supervisor Barrier and Supervisor Quinn. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Any public comments? Dan, nothing? Nope. Deanna, nothing? Okay. All right, we'll move on to item 5, the extension staff report. Now we'll start out with Kristen.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. How
Hi.
you doing? Just a couple of things. I just want to report that we are working on our annual report. So in the coming month or so, you should see that come forward. We'll probably bring it to the extension committee and then we'll socialize that to the entire county board. We are also in discussions with our county report to the entire county board. We are trying to think of some creative ways to report to the board because, as you all know, that each of our program areas could be a separate department, and we are limited to 10 minutes. There's a clerk that will probably pull us off the stage if we are too long, more than 10 minutes. So we're working to figure out. So if any of you have any suggestions as you listen to county reports, as you think about what information you would like knowing extension that you'd like for the rest of the board to know, we would be really grateful to have some feedback from you all. So we can either have a discussion, probably we could put it on the agenda for next month, or we could just come and chat with us. We'd love to do that as well. So that's all I really have, unless the rest of you have any other updates that I missed on the bigger picture. I wasn't looking at you, Larry. Was it?
I got a big picture story though for you. This morning on Wax Radio,
How did I know you were going to talk about this?
well, because I really believe in Dunn County fairs.
Yep.
This morning on Wax Radio, Carl Martin, your boss,
Yep.
says that University Extension agents are going to have a greater presence in Dunn County fairs in the future.
Did he say Dunn? Did he say Dunn County specifically?
He said all counties.
Yes.
And I expect you to maybe check out 3 or 4, 6.
3 or 4 or 6. How many I have?
So I
Yes.
mean, this is being a big issue. Of course, locally, we've been really fortunate to have Zach as a youth development educator. And he went above the call of duty by, being helpful where he needed to be helpful and putting up a pop-up tent area across from the fair office that had a list of kids or a stream of kids in and out of there all the time. And a lot of them were boys and girls clubs, scouts, Girl Scouts. And I thought it made a real positive impact for 4-H and for youth development. And seeing I'm on the fair board, I can say that we have booth space available in the commercial building, and you've had some really good displays there in the past. And would sure like to have more good displays. And I talked to Fair Board President this morning after hearing this, and she says, well, that's kind of a big change. And I says, yes, it is, but all education does not take place in the classroom. And I mentioned it to a lady 15 minutes ago across the road here at Farm Service Agency. And she says, does that mean they'll be helping us out with dairy promotion committees and stuff like that. So I said, well, I didn't know, but that's what your boss said this morning. You're going to be involved.
I know, I listened to that. Yeah, and I'll preempt this a little bit in the sense that our area has already talked about what type of presence that we want to have in all three counties, not just with the 4-H program. And so we've had discussions about, because we have health and well-being, we have, parenting, we've had involvement in the fair even when I was an educator. There are some things that people just are not looking for when they're at the fair, some educational tidbits that they just are not looking for when they're at the fair. They're there for a different reason. And so we just have to be really mindful in that sense. But in terms of ag, yes, we are engaging in those conversations. I think our picture has changed a little bit within the ag landscape. Ryan and Jerry both cover 3 counties. That means 3 county fairs. That could take, that could take 3 weeks out of their summer, and it's a busy summertime. So we have to be mindful in terms of what they're capable of doing in terms of their presence. And so if educationally based, absolutely, we're having those conversations and we're looking at how we can do that, if not in this year's fair, next year's. Because the other thing I'd like to do is pull our institutes into this conversation so that we can be really mindful about what type of education and that our educators have the support that they need in any of the institutes to bring forward some educational content and that they're involved with that as well. So I think what Carl did this morning was great, and I think it's needed, and he's going to lead that leadership, or he will, he's laid out the groundwork. And so now we need to engage with our institutes to help with those educational opportunities. So I think we've got some work to do, but yes. And how did I know that you were going to, in fact, I just told Jason before I came down, I said, who's going to talk to me or is going to say something in the meeting today?
That's because I'm really old. And I've seen it work very well in the past.
Yeah.
And it isn't this podium here, but the podium in the next, thank you. It isn't this podium here, but it's the podium in that room over there. And if you'll go look at it, it was dedicated to the service of Dunn County University Extension Agriculture Agent Howard Kuhn for his years of service. So part of education also is an association with your clientele.
Absolutely.
And I think, however you want to call it, I think it's a wonderful thing that, and because the fair is 5 days long, an educator doesn't have to be there every day. Jerry Clark worked the Chippewa County Fair and the open class show in being, I think he was the clerk for, for ribbon placings and things like that. And it wasn't so much as what he did as an educator, it's what he did as a person in supporting the clientele that were there. There you go.
Thank you. Yep.
Any further questions for Kristen?
I have one.
Okay.
So I've
Dr.
been
Berry.
reading in the news that there's been some uncertainty about federal funding that's affecting various agencies at the local level. Has anything been coming down the pipe that's been affecting you so far or that you might be worried about?
Yeah, great question. We have several federal funding, federal funds that come directly to our programming. One would be FoodWise, so Sandy behind you, that entire program. There are some other monies that touch into these areas, but then also, of course, our Smith Lever funds That's a direct, those funds have been, although stagnant over the last 20 or 30 years, they've never really been up for debate in terms of whether or not we receive those. And a good bulk of our federal funding comes from that Smith Lever funds for the rest of the educators. And so just watching really closely, the new agriculture person that was appointed is 4-H, has 4-H background, farming background, and so we're hopeful that she knows about extension, that she values the work that we do, and we aren't going to see some of those unilateral cuts. I think because we're part of UW-Madison now, that has been really helpful, and we're moving forward. We're being cautious, just like every other agency and entity, but we're moving forward with hires. We're hiring our FoodWise educator in Chippewa County that's open. We have the backing of some UW funds if necessary, and they have indicated their support, knowing that, we're that arm into the Wisconsin families. So, yeah, I mean, I think just like everybody else, kind of bated breath, waiting to see how it might affect our funding.
Okay.
And in the report, in our annual report, I will be including for all of you just how the funding breakdown of extension works, including the county funding, just so you have an idea of how we are funded through some of these state and federal programs, and of course, then our biggest funder being the counties.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I would appreciate that a great deal.
yeah. So we're including that in our annual report.
Great.
Thanks for the question.
Does that include state or just federal mainly?
The report.
No, the grants, I mean, affecting, is it just federal, right? I mean, you get a lot of state grants as well, but they're not cutting as much as the federal.
Correct. Yeah, correct. Right now, we're not hearing about what else has been listening, but I haven't heard much on the state side. It's been mostly federal. In fact, I believe what I read today was the governor's proposed budget has an increase or has money for farmers in that budget proposal that he's putting forward. So it does seem like ag is still, and granted, we're not all ag, but a lot of our money comes from ag-based funding. So we're hopeful that maybe we'll see an increase in state funding if that, but we know that process, what we see in the beginning to what we see at the end is typically not the same. So, but at least we know that the support is there.
Any further questions? Any for the extended educators? Read your report, Zach. Congratulations on new addition to the family. Hopefully everything goes well. That's just, yeah. No. Anybody else got any questions? All right, we'll move on to the presentation, community development. That'd be Garrett.
Yes, that's me. All right, y'all. Let's get this cooking. So as a reminder, my name's Garrett Zaspel. I'm the Regional Community and Leadership Development Educator. So I serve Chippewa, Dunn, and Eau Claire counties. I started in May. So I will also do the flag of if you all are hearing things that are emerging in Dunn County, particularly around the areas of strategic planning, visioning, community conversations, leadership and program development with nonprofits, town governments, anything like that, I'm here as a resource, and I'm happy to connect with you either individually, email, offline, whatever, to see how I can be useful, especially here in Dunn County. Today, what I want to share with you all is what's emerging kind of regionally and what's picked up here in Dunn County in the last couple months. I'm looking at Dan because you've been in these conversations too, which is around emergency medical services. I've been in conversations in Eau Claire County. We had a whole process that wrapped up at the end of last year. Chippewa is ongoing, and it looks like this is picking up in Dunn County. So really paying attention to what's happening with our emergency medical service and fire agencies, particularly within our rural communities. So to give you all some context, here in Wisconsin, we have about 360 ambulance agencies and about 800 fire departments. When we look at the number of calls that are going out in our state, our ambulance calls, so emergency medical services, are about 1 million ambulance runs in the state of Wisconsin. So that's 2,700 runs daily. Not quite as many happening in the fire, which thank goodness, but recognizing that according to some of our state data, we're looking at about 300,000 fire departments responding to emergency medical service calls in the state of Wisconsin. So kind of giving you all the statewide layout of this. Why this matters, so thinking about kind of state statute, is that all townships in the state of Wisconsin are statutorily required to provide ambulance services. So state statute says town board shall contract. Fire protection is also a shall. For our villages and cities, these are there's a mix between may and shall. So council may provide an ordinance for a volunteer fire. Each village shall provide fire. And then for EMS, for villages and cities, it's may. So townships, particularly for our ambulance services, are the ones that are statutorily required. So this is coming from the state, right? And this has created a pressure in our communities because state statute, when it says we are providing this service, it's also saying that our townships, villages, and cities, if we're electing to provide these, particularly for ambulances, are guaranteeing that there is 24/7, 365 coverage. So if any one of the residents of your town calls, there should be an ambulance provided by your township that shows up. Additionally, in 2023, the state passed an additional statute through Act 12 that is requiring all agencies, so our fire departments and our EMS departments, as well as our law enforcement, to basically certify that they are providing coverage at the level that they are certified for under the state. So the state is beginning to monitor this. Here in Dunn County, this is kind of the breakdown of what we see going on. We have 2 career ambulance departments, we have 7 volunteer ambulance departments, and then we have 1 emergency medical responder group. So, and they're based on geography. There's 1 around the city of Menominee, so that's 1 agency. So that's the Menominee Fire Department. There's just 2 different stations, so they've breaked out that jurisdiction differently. There's also 1 emergency medical responder group here in Dunn County. EMRs are unique in that they are not able to basically serve a patient in the back of an ambulance, but can provide life-saving support on site as well as drive an ambulance. So they play an interesting role in all of this. At the bottom of the slide, you also see the varying levels of training that's required with each phase of certification. So that one-time training to get your initial license, as well as the biannual training. So the training that's required every 2 years to maintain that license. For fire, we have 1 combo volunteer and professional fire department here in Dunn County. That's Menominee. And then we have 11 primarily volunteer fire departments. Keeping in mind that that call ratio between fire and EMS or ambulance, we see way more ambulance calls than we do fire, though we still need our fire folks to respond when there's a fire. So the issue that's emerging here in Wisconsin, or is present, is whether these services are reliable and sustainable, right? So reliable meaning, can we put out an ambulance, folks call it the first due, 24/7, 365? Can we document that we are able to provide that as an agency? And then the second part, that sustainable part, is can we ensure that that happens every single day? So the language that's emerging is whether or not we have a failed or failing service. If we have questions about whether we're able to provide that service 365, we are entering the failing state of our service. If we can't do that, and we're able to show that actually someone else is answering most of our calls, we have to bring in the city of Menominee. That's a failed service. Across the state, 41% of EMS services lack reliability, so they are considered failed. We know that this is especially acute in rural Wisconsin, so that's 55% of rural providers. And this is across the state. Here in the northwest corner, we see that it's about 64%. So this is an issue that's impacting the entire, for the entire state, but particularly the west central part of Wisconsin. So part of my goal for you all today is to really give you all a sense of this is one of the issues that's emerged that I'm tackling in my work, and also encouraging you all to really start paying attention to what's happening in your own communities around this. One of the most significant indicators, so if you're talking with folks to ask about, is how many folks are responding to about 80% of their calls. What the data is showing us is that if you have 6 or fewer folks that are responding to 80% or more of your calls, you are likely a failed service. And that's purely a numbers game. So if we look at what it takes to staff one ambulance 24/7, 365 with 2 people, so someone to operate on someone in the back, someone to drive it, it's about 17,000 hours a year. And then if we look at what it would take to be one full-time employee, what we're really looking at is just about 8.5 full-time employees is what it takes to staff an ambulance full-time for a year. So thinking about it in terms of hours. So part of this is we have a lot of things that are going on in our agencies. There's workforce competition. Our hospitals are snatching up paramedics and emergency medical responders. We're seeing declining numbers of volunteers. And for us, especially here in Dunn County, the cities are poaching our folks because they can pay more. Ambulance services in particular are becoming really expensive to operate. This is also true for fire trucks when we look at those capital expenses. And then we see the state increasing the training quantity, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the resources to support folks to go get that training, especially in a volunteer capacity. When you're working full time, you're volunteering with other things, you have a family, to then have to go travel someplace to get trained and certified is just an additional barrier. One important thing to note, so as you all are hearing things among your constituents, many folks talk about, well, the reason that, we don't have as many volunteers is because training has gotten so much harder. Nationally, we just see a large decline in volunteers. So this is data from the U.S. Senate Joint Economic Committee, the Republican caucus within that looked at civil society in the United States. What we see is that fraternal organizations, veteran organizations, labor union, farm organizations are all experiencing declines in membership and volunteers. So we can't necessarily say it's the training requirements. My colleague James Small out of Madison, who I work with along this issue, says there isn't training required to pass the donation plate out at church and be an usher, but it's a whole lot harder to find ushers at church. So training is not necessarily the barrier, though it is a barrier. And then some additional challenges that we're seeing, one is poor governance. So we see that often township and municipal boards don't understand their role and responsibility as it relates to the statute and supervising and ensuring that 365 24/7 is being met. We see that often our directors are really, really trying to do their best, right? These are folks that are going to the ends of the earth, literally to the most rural parts of our counties to try and provide these life-saving services. And they just can't do much more, right? So these are folks that are trying to make it work and the system is failing. They're not failing, the system is failing. And then, especially here in Western Wisconsin, we see unfavorable demographics, right? We have an older population that's requiring more services. We're getting more calls for falls in a home or rides to a hospital from an assisted living or nursing home, and that's further straining our resources. And there's a number of different consequences that we're seeing around this. We're seeing dispatch centers be overwhelmed. Here in Wisconsin, we're seeing some agencies close up shop. And then, especially this past winter, we've seen our hospital system really get hit hard. And that has impact then for the ability to actually treat patients when they show up in an ambulance. In Wisconsin, other communities are looking at opportunities to solve this challenge. So similar to kind of what's happening here in Dunn, Chippewa, and Eau Claire counties. This is a map of kind of what other counties are doing as it relates to issuing countywide levies to help alleviate some of the financial concerns, as well as some of the other counties that are having this conversation. So those are the kind of striped counties that you see. And then the last thing that I'll share with you all are just some kind of ideas around what's going on. So first is we're seeing agencies here in Wisconsin really try to be innovative with what they're doing. Some are looking at internship programs to really bring in folks from the ground up and getting some guaranteed labor for at least a couple of years. We're also seeing that kind of pivot towards how are we making sure that our agencies are, working with folks who work for them, right? That they're places that people want to be and feel like they're treated well by the agency. And then there's a report that I'm happy to share with you all that came out this month from the National Association of EMTs, which just gave some things for us to consider. So one is focusing less on response time. There's kind of our magic number is 30 minutes. Some communities get really caught up that there needs to be an ambulance there within 10 minutes. That there isn't data that indicates that there's higher rates of saving lives based on that. So it's thinking more about how are we putting out the kind of care needed for the type of call that's coming in. One other thing that's emerged is there should be less reliance on lights and sirens. That actually can be more dangerous in an ambulance when you're speeding with lights and sirens on. There's nothing that indicates that you get better service or better outcomes doing that. And then just some other things, thinking about how can we use resources differently to treat non-acute cases. That should be called dispatches, not disposition. Thinking about how we can better coordinate our communication center and thinking about triage systems geographically. So I threw a ton of information at you all. I'd gladly take any questions that you have with this. And just know that this is a conversation that's beginning here in Dunn County, but is something that I at least hope that you all are thinking about and are supporting, the work that's happening in your townships and municipalities.
To me, a lot of this volunteers, I mean, students and people are getting more and more involved in sports. So
Yep.
parents are traveling, I think, got time to volunteer for this. They're never
Absolutely.
home. They're doing it's,
Mm-hmm.
we had a fire department, Rock Creek down there, had 20, 30 people on there one time. Now we're down to like 8,
Right.
They just won't volunteer to do it anymore. It's just,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's figuring out what can we do with those 8 people that are doing really good and important work? And then how can we make sure that we can meet that statutory requirement? 1, because it's required, but 2, because we all want to live in communities where if there's an emergency, someone will respond.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Supervisor Quinn.
Yes, thank you. This is great information. What I'm wondering is, this seems like a situation that cries out for innovation and collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned you're having discussions. So Monica and I are both on the Planning and Resource Committee, and we're sort of trying to manage this comprehensive planning process, which should involve discussions about this kind of thing, not just land use, but these sorts of things. So I'm wondering what sorts of discussions are happening and how are they being framed?
So right now it's just preliminary. One of the townships, the town of Elk Mound, submitted a grant to hire a consultant to look at what are the potentials that exist here in Dunn County. Otherwise, that's kind of it. So I think we are at the very beginning stages of imagining what this could look like here.
Okay.
The kind of discourse across the state is there's 72 counties in Wisconsin. There's going to be 72 plus different ways of doing EMS here. I think it's figuring out what works right here. I think we have a unique advantage of having kind of the city of Menominee in the dead center of the county. So figuring out if there's a way to geographically disperse resources that way. Or you have places, Bayfield County is in discussion about like hiring 2 community paramedics that are on call and are in different parts of Bayfield
Right.
County, depending on the time, like where there is or isn't staffing, and that are also, I think, registered RNs, so can help meet folks who need less acute care or who need that non-acute care, and do some of the community healthcare work.
So how can we do that in a way that satisfies the legal requirements in addition to the financial requirements?
That's a conversation, I think, for us, like,
Right.
it's a
Yeah.
collective conversation. So I think
Yeah.
it's one of those things where I think if there's appetite on the board, the county board, to really move this conversation forward. I know the Towns Association, I'm looking at Dan again, has been part of this conversation too.
Sure.
So I think it's figuring out who are our vested players that want to be at the table getting those folks together. And I think that's a role that extension can take if there is community appetite for it, and helping us figure out what do we want to look like, this to look like moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's where we are right now. Is it's a problem that the towns have identified and have been talking about, and they did reach out to the county, and that's where some of this work is starting to happen. And part of Garrett's presentation here today is starting to help the county board understand that these
Sure.
problems are happening, because right now it's a town problem. It obviously impacts the county in general and the people that live in the county, but those statutes were
If we're gonna have,
municipalities.
yeah,
So
if we're gonna have
yeah.
healthy rural communities, we have to have these
Yeah.
services figured out.
Yep.
There's no way, it's just bottom line, end of story.
so
So,
yep. So we're starting to help set the understanding of what's going
Okay.
on, and part of the grant that Elk Mound is doing hopefully will help us come up with some of those innovative. It is actually the innovation grant that they apply.
is that what it's called? Really? One of those state grants, the governor's grants?
Yep.
Yeah. So, well, it's the innovation planning grant. So
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is the grant to plan for a future innovation project, is what they've applied for.
Good work. And the other thing I was gonna comment on was on a similar kind of effort in the childcare issue. And that seems like something, again, we can't rely on individuals to solve. We have to figure out collaborative solutions. And I'm glad to see you've been putting time in that.
And I'm there too. Yep.
I think it, especially with how generations have been trending as to what type of work they do, where they live, that a lot of my generation isn't spending a lot of time in rural communities. And I think that is probably what makes volunteering most difficult, because the people that you have, the pool of potential volunteers that you have is getting to an age where being a volunteer firefighter, EMT, can be really taxing just on yourself, and adding that onto your own home life and work life and all that. And I think it would be really important to try finding for at least one person per area or something that we can offer an actual, like, almost stable job.
Yeah.
For that, because you're putting yourself in, you're putting your own life at risk to save others, and that you shouldn't have to just be doing that. I mean, doing it out of the kindness of your heart, it's important, but if something happens to you, then how do we help you get the care that you need?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. And I think this should hopefully be part of this planning grant, is figuring out kind of what are the demographics of our volunteers in Dunn County. I helped lead a pilot study up in Chippewa, and we're looking at like the average age of a volunteer in some of these districts is 60 to 70 years old. And, heaven forbid, like you'd want to go to Arizona in February, but I know there's one couple up in Chippewa County. It's a husband, wife, they're both in their 70s, and a third person, and they're the ones that are responding to 80% of the calls. And it's like, maybe they want to go to, Arizona and not be in this, because that's where I would like to be.
Any further questions?
Larry, nothing?
Well, I do have one if you want.
Sorry.
Fire call in Springbrook costs $500. Is that a high, low rate, or who determines what the townships feel they have to charge? There you go.
Oh, that's very specific, and I do not have an answer. But I think that's something that Dan,
Well, I
look,
mean,
yeah,
the answer is it's the town, but in relation with the service provider that they contract with. So as you look at that map that he had shown earlier, the towns decide which provider they want to cover their town. And I think that's a piece of that I guess I discovered as part of this, is that isn't necessarily the closest provider. It's most likely the least expensive provider. And so that's kind of that decision that town boards are faced with right now, is deciding which company do we want to go with in order to provide this. And just like you as county board members are deciding between different services, the towns are deciding, do we fix this road or do we pay more for ambulance services? And those are some of the struggles that they're faced with right now. So it is a scattering. That is yes, part of the plan is to identify, how much each town is paying and what are these based on, and what are these inequities. And you talk about some of the response times is some of the, I guess, anecdotal data that we know from our emergency management department is that we know some of the providers that some of the towns are working with are not responding to calls, which is resulting in other providers going to cover that area. So it's a fun problem.
I guess to expand on that is, in your research, have you seen any financial advantage to possibly having a more centralized service where I think, and correct me if I'm wrong from what I saw on that map that you had, but with Door County, which is where I grew up.
Yeah.
I think they have their own centralized
Mhm.
service. Does that, have you seen that benefits, I guess really everybody for having that, where it's kind of county funded, and so that you're not necessarily contracting with another agency that is either outside of your area that's further away, but kind of within that.
And that's something that I think that the plan, or what the research that's being done, that grant would go for, would be to kind of look at those types of things. But I think that's something, as we look at Village of Ridgeland, for example, it's most likely they're going to want to have somebody from Barron responding, not somebody from Menominee. It just makes more sense, right? So I think there is a matter of looking at some of those things. I think Downing in Glenwood City, I don't know what the status of Glenwood City is, right? But it's those proximity. Elk Mountain is another one with their proximity to Eau Claire. What is the best service to be provided? And that's kind of that question. And then there's statutes.
And I think there's a couple of things that emerge in that. So one is the financial component. So state statute so I know EMS better than fire, which is why I looked at Dan when Larry asked his question. So state statute allows counties to exceed their levy for emergency medical services. So that's a carve out in state statute. Last I talked to folks in Madison, there's rumors that there's going to be a bill coming out in this legislative session that allows townships or municipalities to form fire districts, or not fire districts, emergency medical districts that would give those districts levy capacity. So it wouldn't have to be entire counties. But I think the rule was like 8 or more municipalities and there's like number of municipalities, population, geography. I don't fully know. I haven't seen that bill yet. So that's part of why Door County has countywide. So they're able to levy, fund an EMS service, and then figure out what's the best way to do it for that county. So I think Door County, like the county government, really is the one that's operating it. Some counties say we're levying, but then we're contracting out with either municipal providers, so like the Menominee Fire Department, and private providers or private providers. There's a lot of different ways to do this, which is why there's going to be 72 plus different ways. And I think this idea of county borders, especially in our part of the state, is going to continue to be a big question where it's like, yeah, the best provider might actually be in the county next door. What can we do then? Or how can we take advantage of that to ensure that our residents are getting the best service possible when they're calling in a time of crisis?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Larry.
That's a kind of an interesting concept there. I live probably 4 miles from Elk Mound and their fire department, and 10 miles or better to Menominee. And when I had a fire and they threw me in the ambulance for smoke inhalation, 3 days later, had a triple bypass. So I'm kind of glad they knew what they were doing.
Mhm.
So.
It's hilarious.
See no more. Anybody else got any questions? Good report. That was
Thanks.
very informational.
Exciting times from Extension.
Yeah, good report. All right, move on to item 6, items placed at the request of the chair, economic development update. Dan?
All right. Economic development, Dunn County Economic Development is meeting, well, I don't know if they made it over there, or if they're upstairs, but they're meeting right now. I did actually attend the Greater Menominee Economic Development meeting this morning, so I can give you a little bit of the update that Adam had provided to that committee. So GMDC has actually responded to an RFP for the area, actually, well, and Dunn County Economic Development. Adams kind of works amongst all of them. So a few different options of different locations, including a specific, or Adam is working specifically with the Village of Wheeler, who had reached out about some economic development activity and growth within their village, which is, I think, a welcome sign, and one of the things that I think the goal of that position and having somebody in Dunn County Economic Development is to be able to reach out to some of those villages and not just do everything in Menominee. So excited about that Wheeler was looking for that, and we were able to provide some responses that will, whether a business moves to Wheeler or Menominee or wherever, there's an opportunity now because that information got out. So that's been good. And then Adam's also scheduling his business retention and expansion visits with 3 different businesses within the county. So starting to get out there, boots on the ground, meeting with different people. So I would say, if anything, we're seeing the progress that we hope to see. So, and then housing. So I'll just say that, right? Continue to work on housing.
Any questions for Dan on economic development? Okay, 6B, Dunn County Communications.
Yes. Communications, we're working on a story as Austin Witt is working. If you watched the county board meeting last week, working on rural route, a new plan for the rural routes to cover the corners of the county. So as Austin's finalizing the plans for that, we're working on a story to help kind of launch that program in the county. So looking forward to that getting out as soon as that gets finalized. And then been working with the planning and zoning department, coming up with creative plans to get engagement in the comp plan. So, and so I expect we'll probably see we already do a news release. There'll definitely be a news release with that, but also just a lot of different social media campaigns and other ways that we can get people engaged in those. So, Krista in our office, as well as Tammy in the planning office, are coming up with ways to engage people, because that's the phase of the comp plan we are in. So
If you do a news release on anything like that, that'd be nice. We talked about that before, just thought we could send it out to us and stuff. I mean, that's,
Sure.
Yeah. That'd be nice to get that stuff. Good. I don't always see it out there, so it's nice
Yep.
to see.
yeah, we can certainly get those included.
Any more questions for Dan on communications? Let's go to 6C, broadband communications. A discussion?
I feel like this agenda just needs to say the time where Dan just talks on
Yeah,
different
You could
items.
probably go through
Yeah.
them all, but
And it's getting longer. Broadband discussion, not a whole lot going on. Next week is the end of the application period for round 1 of the BEAD grants. So county board approved or endorsed a couple of providers. They have submitted theirs. We still need to approve the minutes of that last meeting so that they can have the finalized minutes for their application, but that'll happen tomorrow. So next week, BEAD will end, and then we'll see, or well, the BEAD round 1 will end, and then we'll start to see what that looks like going forward. Was talking with somebody from West Central Regional Planning who works on some of the broadband stuff. So the counties in their district are all of the counties are at 90%. I still think we're probably the closest, but this region is kind of well ahead of a lot of the other areas in the county. Turns out we're not as good at emergency management, but we're okay at broadband. So, and that has been, I think, really, there's a lot of local co-ops in this corner of the state, and they've been the ones that have really been pushing a lot of the expansion in these areas. So,
So the monies for the grants that were already approved, they can't lose those, can they? I mean, they've already been approved to these companies.
The BEAD grant, which is part of the it was a bipartisan infrastructure law, and there was some discussion about so that as much as that is happening at the federal level, you had talked about state grants before. You have to be very careful. A lot of the state grants that we get are federal grants that the federal government grants the money to the state, and then the state allocates it to the county to be able to do that. So that's true of a lot of the grants that we have throughout the county, that as much as we receive them from the state, they are federal funding. The BEAD grants are federal funding. There has been discussion about a potential clawback, but then also a lot of resistance. So everybody's moving forward as if everything is going to happen. I think for the most part, as the law would say, that the broadband expansion does fall in that bipartisan world. So I think that's probably something that's safe, but that's just Dan guessing.
I did hope so.
Yep. So
Any questions for Dan on broadband? All right, 6D, Dunn County Tourism.
yeah. It's one we can probably get rid of.
Yeah, we could probably eliminate
So
that.
yes, we had talked about that before. The website is live through the Chamber of Commerce.
Okay, any further questions on that? No. Go to 6C, Colfax Library Funding and how library funding works. We'll have a discussion with Andrew here and he can tell us how it all comes together.
And I want to, just as we do this, and Supervisor Bauer's aware of that, we're trying to structure some of these things a little bit differently. So you'll notice we have a discussion item right now about the library, and then there is an action item later on. So, so there isn't a resolution written for a budget adjustment if you do want to go forward with this later. But right now, we are understanding the problem.
Yeah, we're trying to get all the committees to do the same Robert's rules. So we're trying to line these all up. So it's something we're all going to get lined up with. So Andrew.
Okay, so we'll talk about a little bit about how library funding works, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Colfax request, right, that you had heard from last week. So I just kind of wanted to give you a brief overview of how counties fund libraries and what that means across the state of Wisconsin. So will you go to the next one, Deanna? So in Wisconsin, there are 381 public libraries across the state, and they're all broken into these different districts. And if you look over here on the left, we're part of the IFLIS library system, right? It's a multi-county region in western Wisconsin that shares the county responsibility, and they're based out of Eau Claire. So all 4 county libraries that we have in Dunn County are all part of the IFLIS system, but collectively they're all part of the greater state of Wisconsin's 15 different library systems. So if you have been to the library recently, you'll have your More library card. And the More library system allows you to access data and information or materials from any of the 15 county library systems. So if you go to the Menominee Public Library and you say, hey, I really wanted this book, and they say, well, we don't have it. The Eau Claire Library has it. They'll do an interlibrary loan request and they'll send it here so you can check it out. And then they'll let you know. They'll probably, I think they send you an email and a text saying, hey, your item is in, you can come check it out. So because of that, even though we're located here in Western Wisconsin, there's potential for Dunn County residents to be using materials from any of the other libraries in the entire state of Wisconsin. Now, most of the time, the Dunn County residents will be using the counties that are most surrounding Dunn County, right? So Polk, Barron, Rusk, Chippewa, Eau Claire, Pepin, St. Croix, and Pierce. But essentially, if you are a county resident, you go to any other library and you borrow their materials, they will let you take them and check them out for their checkout period. Now, I will preface this by saying there are several libraries that have gone away from traditional library fines because they find that they are economically suppressive of certain groups of people. It's important to note. So as that is the case, the same situation happens if an Eau Claire resident comes to Dunn County and checks out materials. What happens is each of the libraries, when you check out a material, keeps track of who's checking out that information and what county you're from. So at the end of the year, all the libraries run a report and they say, okay, for the Ellie Phillips Library in Eau Claire, we had X number of resources and we had X number of people from Dunn County check out those materials, and your circulation cost is this, and there's a whole bunch of formulas that we'll look at, right? So at the end of the year, all these libraries are saying, they send the Dunn County, me, the clerk, information and say, hey, here's how many people in Dunn County used our resources. And then what we have to do per state statute is divvy out the amount of money that have to be allocated to those libraries for their funds. So does that make sense? We kind of, everyone's sharing money across the resources. There's no limit to a public library in the state of Wisconsin. Go to the next one, yeah. So when we look at Dunn County, this was super fun for me to do today. When we look at Dunn County, right, obviously the Menominee Public Library is the biggest one. And in the orange, you're going to see the total number of items that were circulated. And then by county, Dunn County's in green. I tried to stay on brand, Dan. And then any of the out-of-county library participants, that's that far right maroon column. So you can see in Menominee, we had 211 roughly 1,000 items that were checked out by individuals, but that actually the out-of-county participation in the Menominee Public Library was higher than the people in the county. That's not the case for the Colfax Library or the Boyceville Library. Most of those are used from in-county residents. But you'll see Sand Creek actually also has that same situation where there's more people from out of the county that are using the Sand Creek Library than in Sand Creek. Now, one of the reasons for that is that Sand Creek is located in the top right northeastern corner of the county. And so Barron County and Chippewa County and Taylor, what? Sure. Other counties are closer to that library. So any of those rural areas up in that northwestern part can go to Sand Creek. That might be their closest library that they're using. So you can just see that that's a difference. So in Menominee, for example, at the end of the year, they're going to go find these 107 participants of materials that were checked out from whichever county, and they're going to bill out those counties for the amount of materials that the Menominee Public Library loaned out. So it's just kind of interesting to look at that. Yeah. Oh yeah, Tom, sorry. Sure. Can you go back one, Deanna?
So the maroon line
Yeah.
is people who from outside the county, not just outside of Menominee.
Yeah, outside of the county.
Even though you're tracking Menominee, you're tracking outside the county. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
so this is
Okay.
Menominee Public Library, and so this is everybody from Dunn County that use their resources, and this is everybody from outside of
Okay.
Dunn County as a
Alright.
whole. Yep. Yeah, I know that gets a little confusing, but yeah, That's it's interesting to look at that, to know that Menominee in the center of Dunn County has more resources that are going out than are actually staying in. So how does library funding work? So this is a little tricky in that any county or any municipality that has a library in it, their municipality actually funds the library at a certain percentage, right? So in the city of Menominee, for example, they have a library, so we don't actually apportion out taxes to that library because for the citizens of the city of Menominee, because they are already paying their local city property taxes that are actually contributing to the library, right? So we do this basically. Town of Colfax does not have a library. The village of Colfax has a library. It's important to remember that there's multiple Colfaxes and multiple Elkmounds. So the town of Colfax residents are all apportioned out taxes for the libraries within Dunn County. And then the village of Knapp as well, same situation. They don't have a library in the village, so they're actually paying property tax for their libraries. This is because municipalities that have a library have the ability to opt out of participating in the county taxes because their citizens are already paying local property taxes, right? So the city's already divvying out money to the Menominee Public Library, so they don't have to pay additional taxes. So they're not kind of getting hit twice in an apportioned tax. Does that make sense? It gets a little confusing that way. Okay, we go to the next one, Deanna. So this is more statutes. So everything I do is based on how the state statutes are written and how we pay out the libraries. So the Wisconsin statutes, chapter 43, is all about libraries. It's really fascinating, especially at 3 a.m. if you can't sleep. It's something you could like really dive into. No offense to any of the library people that are listening. So the state statutes say that there's a minimum of 70% funding that each of the counties has to provide to the libraries that are requesting payment for that county citizens that use their services, right? So in Dunn County, we have a long tradition, as you recall, if you've been on this committee for a while, we always fund the in-county libraries, our 4 in-county libraries at 100%, and all of the out-of-county libraries at 70%. We're a very unique county in that way. There are several other counties that fund their in-county libraries at 100%. But if you look at the different counties, all 71 other counties in the state of Wisconsin, they all have different varying levels of how they fund the libraries. Some counties fund out-of-county libraries at 70% and in-county libraries at 70%. Some Chippewa funds them at 92%. Just a neat little number they came up with. So it really varies by county. And so the 4 county libraries of Dunn County will make their report to the county board tomorrow, and we'll talk to you about how greatly they appreciate the funding at 100% from our county. So our 4 libraries are getting 100% of their funding from Dunn County, and they're getting a minimum of 70% of funding from any of the other counties, right? So what we talked about, the county board has to pay for library services. That's where the money comes from the county. And so you have to levy a tax to be able to do that. And this is that part where any municipality that has a library is able to opt out, so they're not paying twice for county libraries. I know Larry Bjork doesn't like to be taxed twice or any more than he needs to be, so I know. So we got to make sure we do that. And the other part that's really tricky about libraries is we go on a 3-year cycle for library funding. Oh, sorry. So in 2023, for example, we were paying out the 2021 requests in 2023. And then in 2023, they're assembling the usage of 2022. Now this gets confusing because we have to close out 1 year before we can report on what all happened in that year, right? So December of 31st marks the end of the fiscal year for libraries. And so in January of 22, they start reporting out the 21 numbers so we can pay it out in 23. Blah. It's really fun and neat to figure that out, right? So basically it's like this. 2023, the year happened. In 2024, they assembled the 2023 report for us to pay out in 2025. Does that make sense? So we always are kind of running it's a 3-year cycle, but we're paying it 2 years behind. So that's just one of those unique features about how library funding works, and it can get confusing. It's important when we talk about the Colfax Library, we'll look at a year-over-year comparison and why their numbers have been different. So for example, this was the 2025 budget that was approved in November of 23 for the November of 24 for the year 2023, right? So we're always working backwards. So we keep a spreadsheet, right, of all the different, and we have several more, but I just condensed it so you could see, out of county libraries that request it. Now this changes year after year, right? So some years we might get Dunn County residents. You can see that there were 193 in 2023 that use the Turtle Lake Library. But in 2024, that number could be 0. It could be substantially more. It could be substantially less. They fluctuate pretty significantly each year. So you can see Turtle Lake Library is in Barron County. And the way that we calculate this is their total operating budget. And this is the total number of the circulation that they had, right? So if we take this number divided by the total circulation, it gets the cost per circulation, right? And then there were 193 residents that used it. So we take $9.29 for the Turtle Lake Library times 193. And at 100% funding, this is the amount that we would have to pay them out. But at 70% funding, this is actually what we did end up paying them out, right? So for all those out-of-county libraries, we're always doing it at 70%. The in-county libraries are obviously different. We fund those at 100% of the funding, right? But same formula. Here is the operating budget for Boyceville, their total circulation, the cost per circulation, the Dunn County resident usage, and how we get this ultimate number that we pay out. So for this year, the Dunn County Clerk's Office processed $799,990.97 in payouts to libraries across the state of Wisconsin. Okay, will you go to the next one? And another spreadsheet, because I love a spreadsheet. So when I actually have to apportion taxes at the end of the year, after the county board has adopted a budget, right? This is where we find in this library purposes one, here's that $799,000. What we're doing is we're taking that total amount of money that the county board has approved, and we have to spread it out over all the different 30 municipalities in Dunn County, except for the 4 that have a library in their community, right? So you can see here's Sand Creek. There's no library funding that's apportioned for them, as well as for the village of Boyceville, the village of Colfax, and then the city of Menominee. So really, $799,000 is being spread across the 26 municipalities in Dunn County to fund that $799,000. Okay, we go to the next one. And then, of course, I had to throw in a Walter Cronkite thing and give my library people a little shout out because it's really important. So are questions about how libraries are funded? It's quite complicated and complex, but especially when we look at the year over year, we're paying 2 years out and how we spread it across the municipalities. Are there any questions about that? Okay. Well, thanks. Deanna, will you pull up the report that I put in that one as well? So what you heard last month from Colfax was their request, right? And in the report that's in your packet as well, in the staff report that I put together, it kind of assembles some of that same information so you can take it with you and study it very brilliantly. But then also there's that Colfax request. So if you go to the second page of the staff report, there's going to be that comparison year over year, right? So in 2024, you can see the amount that the Colfax Library was funded versus the 2025 amount, which is about $17,000 difference. I will note that every single library in Dunn County, all 4 of them, did receive less funding in 2025 than they did in 2024. That's partly because of the total circulation cost. That's that whole spreadsheet that we looked at, right? The number of people participating in the library, circulation costs, everything like that. So what Colfax is requesting, I believe their final request was for an additional $5,000 in funding. Because for a library like Colfax, when you look at their overall budget of $131,000, $17,000 is a pretty big hit for them when we look at the funding. So that's where Colfax has kind of stepped up and said, hey, we would really like this funding. Now, it's my job to fund the libraries and apportion that all, and I will talk really passionately about how important it is. But also, we have 4 libraries in Dunn County, and Colfax is requesting additional funds. And the library directors are all wonderful, but they're all probably talking to each other. And so I'm not advocating one way or another that you should request, or that you should fund the request for the Colfax Library for that additional $5,000. We go to the next page, Deanna, just scroll down a little bit. So yeah, so here's that total that Colfax is short, right? $17,143.25. So the 2024, they were at 93,000 minus the 76 that we allocated for 2025. It's less because their overall circulation was less. And so when you have your overall circulation, and then the cost of circulation times the number of people that are using it, so all of those numbers were smaller, and that's how we get to that $17,000 shortfall. So, and it's tricky. We looked at this like 6 different times because I was like, we have to make sure that this is right. But the formula is the formula, right? It's just circulation costs divided by the number of participants in the overall budget. So I will say that the 4 libraries we have been very, very diligent about keeping as flat line a budget they can and seeking other grant funds where they can to make up for the usage.
Their argument, as I understood it last time, was that in particular, the circulation from residents of Colfax was down. Can you explain how that factors in?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So what's the best? I don't want to keep making Deanna to like hop back and forth between things. But okay. Actually, if you just scroll up, Deanna, I think I can do it this way. Yeah. Okay. So for Colfax, right? So their overall budget for 23 was $147,000. That's pretty close to their 2022 budget. But what happened was their total circulation was down. And so their total circulation was down, which the 147 divided by the total circulation of 31,000 equals this $4.72, which is the cost of item per circulation, right? And so that number was less, and the overall Dunn County usage number was less. So when we have a smaller cost of circulation plus smaller usage in Dunn County.
If circulation was down, wouldn't the per item payment be higher? You're dividing the circulation into the budget, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So,
So 140.
but the Dunn County usage, which is funded at 100%, was down.
Was down.
The out of county usage, which
Was up.
is only required to be funded at 70%, was up.
Yes. So sorry. Yes. So this 31,000 total circulation is higher than the previous year, but the Dunn County circulation was lower. So we have higher circulation equals a lower cost per circulation, and then so lower cost per circulation and
Okay.
less participation from Dunn County equaled that $17,000 shortfall.
Right.
I know that's a lot of numbers. So, are there other questions on that or clarification that you need for anything?
So if I were to like summarize the basic problem is that there are more people from somewhere else in the state that are using Colfax's library. And those municipalities are only paying 70% of the cost. Whereas if a Dunn County resident was borrowing from that library, we'd be paying them 100%. And so because of the fact that that sort of shifted, the balance shifted, now they have this big budget shortfall.
Hmm.
And furthermore, like their budget isn't very flexible, right? Like they
Right.
can't like spend less on their facilities or whatever, or there's not a lot of flexibility in their personnel or whatever.
Right.
And so they're kind of stuck. So
Yes.
that's in a nutshell what the problem is.
Yes, that's good.
Can I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
So you alluded to the fact that there's 4 libraries, right? Colfax
Yes.
is just one. Are the other libraries experiencing similar problems?
Yes, all 4 Dunn County libraries received less funding this year than they had in the previous year. I'm gonna do numbers off the top of my head. Colfax was one of the biggest one. Well, Colfax was $17,000 less. The Menominee Public Library, I think, was $16,000 less than their previous year. But you can see with a substantially larger budget, $16,000 in a $1 million budget is not as impactful as a $141,000 budget or $47,000 for Colfax. Boyceville's was down about $4,000, I believe, and Sand Creek's was down $2,000. Roughly, those are the numbers. So they were all less than the prior year. But Colfax, I mean, there was a pretty big percentage cut to Colfax. So
Thanks.
So if I'm understanding correctly, out of all 4 libraries.
Yeah.
Colfax is the one who would most need the assistance.
I bet if you ask the library directors, they would all say that they all need the assistance. But Colfax is the one that has taken the biggest hit,
Right.
and that's why they've come back to ask for.
I mean, they all
some
yeah,
sort
they
of
all
additional
need it.
funding.
Help, but
Yeah.
Colfax is the one who is in the most need.
Yes.
And they did receive grants to cover most of the costs, I think, because if I got the email right from the board, they only needed 5,000 to cover what they have left, I think, or something like that, because they had received grants.
Yep. So again, in the scarcity market that they're trying to figure out, they got grants for around $12,000, and so they're just asking for $5,000 additional funding from the county. I ran the quick numbers, and the $17,000 is roughly 12% of their overall budget. So I mean, that's a pretty big hit to have taken. So yeah, that $5,000, that's just what they're asking for. And I don't know that the Menominee Public Library, Boyceville or Sand Creek will come back and ask for more money. I can't speak to that, but so far it's just Colfax. It might be something though. So right now, we're collecting all the reports from 2024 to pay out in 2026. You'll see the CR&T committee will see that spreadsheet, this very in-depth spreadsheet by about the June or July meeting for you to kind of start making some decisions on percentage of funding. What I will do this year versus something we've done in prior years is I'll actually give you an overall funding comparison for the in-county libraries, because I think that would be helpful. I think perhaps it could have been caught earlier on if I would have drawn more attention to the fact that we're looking at Colfax potentially receiving $17,000 less. If we would have looked at it in June last year versus January of this year, it might have made a difference. So I'll do a year over year comparative analysis for you as well in the report that we provide, so that you can see if this is going to happen and maybe if we want to be proactive about it. But again, that's up to the committee.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh God. Yes, here, I have another thing.
So I sit on the board for our newly merged United Way, and Colfax Library asked us for a community grant, which we granted them. They asked for help with their computers, which were aging. One had died and they need to replace it, probably the other one too. And part of that discussion was about how much libraries do that is not circulation.
Mhm.
So it's helping aging residents connect with the internet, understanding how to use their phones. They basically serve as sort of social services. And I'm wondering what will happen to our community as, like, we have a funding mechanism, but it doesn't count for all the other things that libraries are doing. It just counts for books taken out or maybe videos rented or
Media,
something,
yep.
media of some kind.
Mhm.
But circulation is one specific service. And what Colfax was doing last year, it sounds like they really had a big increase in walk-in traffic for their community that was struggling with especially technology. So I just want to put that out there. I don't understand, it sounds like this is all by statute, so not something that we can maybe deal with, but to know as this board that our libraries are serving our community in a lot of ways that they don't get credit for. So they are having to reach out for grants.
Yeah, so like, for example, the Menominee Public Library checks out, you can check out a hotspot if you don't have internet access, which Dan has worked very diligently to make sure there's a good fiber throughout the county, right? But for now, you can get a hotspot and check that out. That's not necessarily considered in circulation. We found out that the Sand Creek Library, you can check out a pressure cooker for all of your canning needs. which has sparked an interesting debate about, we should probably have some sort of safety protocol that people sign off when they take a pressure cooker. But anyway, yeah, there's all sorts of examples of that, of the things that people can check out from the library that aren't traditional books, DVDs, stuff like that.
Right, Supervisor Quinn, then Supervisor Burnt, then Larry. Okay.
Okay, so it seems like the, I mean, the problem for Colfax and for all the libraries is that uh, they have an unexpectedly large drop in town use of the library. And these numbers are coming from kind of 3 years ago. So
Right.
we haven't been monitoring it in the way that we probably haven't been monitoring it in a way that could track that because it's a new kind of development. So I hear you saying you think you can help them anticipate that going forward because their expenses are, as long as they're reasonable, are covered by levy. Or not covered by levy, they're covered by, we don't have a limit on them, right? They're not levy limited.
Correct. Libraries don't fall within the levy limit.
Right.
Right. I was actually just gonna pull open this statute up to 100%. I'm guessing you're not allowed to.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
Goals.
So it's incumbent that they provide us with realistic budgets going forward based on realistic historical averages and stuff. And they're not gonna be perfect, but they should never be this far off, so.
Yeah, and I think, and if you recall, like last year's Dunn County Library presentation of the county board, they were still talking about how in 2023 they were still not having the numbers that they had anticipated post-pandemic, right? And I think when you'll hear from them tomorrow night, you'll hear that their numbers for 2024 that they run so far are above and beyond 2023. They were kind of still growing, clawing back out of the pandemic, and several of them had done by 2024 several new innovative things to bring people into the library to participating more in the services and in circulation. So hopefully I can't speak to what they're going to talk about tomorrow. Actually, I can. I got the PowerPoint today, but I'm not going to do that. I'll wait for.
So, if I understand correctly, what we fund is based off of, for the most part, book circulation.
Books, media, so like
Yeah.
CDs, stuff like that.
So can I clarify? It is distributed by circulation. The total operating budget is the
Right.
total operating
Yeah.
budget. So that includes all of the additional services they provide. It's just divided by circulation.
Yeah.
Right. So, given what Louisa said, with libraries doing a lot more than just checking out books or media, whatever, and I know like the Stout Library has a whole bunch more than what is just their catalog that's available. And I know, like going back when I was living in New Brighton over a year ago, and it wasn't the building wasn't the whole library, but the library was in the building, but it was a whole community center with an indoor playground for all the families to be in. And so I don't know if it's something that maybe we can do as a committee, but create some sort of framework for doing additional support for the libraries, but based on those other services that they provide, not just on their circulation.
Sure.
That's anything that we could possibly do, but I think that might to kind of proactively help with the situation as they start doing more and more,
Right.
which is what it's sounding like they're going to.
Yeah. So from a levy perspective, which doesn't count in our levy limit, libraries are exempt from that. We could only, the county actually as a whole can only fund 100% of this formula. It would be up to the Community Resource and Tourism Committee to decide if you wanted to do additional funding going forward, which is why I think it'll be helpful for that year-over-year comparative analysis to see what they would be anticipating in the next year's cycle to maybe get ahead of that. But that's certainly something that, I believe that the contingency fund, is it a contingency fund request, Dan?
No, it's just a budget adjustment to
Just a
use
budget
general
adjustment, okay.
fund.
General fund, okay. So for this example, the $5,000 is gonna be a budget request from the general fund usage, which we have set aside for certain things, so.
Yeah, because I was thinking like if it's something that is based on them being a service provider of, I mean, community resources, like I mean, even more like helping older folk figure out how their phone works, like, and that's
There's
a lot of stuff
of
that takes a lot of time, and I think that if that is what is impacting one of the things that's impacting their operating cost, but we're not specifically funding them based on that, I think that we should be doing something that fills in that gap. That again, either as a separate calculation somehow, so that we're still following state statute. But I think that would be important to consider.
I mean,
I think Larry's up.
I'm sorry, yeah. Go ahead.
When I first heard this from the Colfax library and what I hear here today, I would, support them receiving the extra $5,000 from Dunn County. But just help me explain, when you talk about the levy limit, if there's less usage from from the village of Colfax, don't they have a taxing mechanism that they then can go to their residents and come up with the $5,000 instead of myself and my neighbors doing it? I mean, I'm willing to do it, but where does the city, where does Colfax fit in the funding?
Sure, and I'd have to double check with Lisa, but I think that part of the difference of they're $17,000 short and they found an additional $12,000, so they're asking the county for $5,000. I think that some of that $12,000 did come from the village of Colfax as an additional request. Yep.
Yeah, they did say that the village of Colfax, there was a little hit on them too, so
Yep.
they did what they could, and then
Mhm.
now they're coming back to us.
I just, in response to the discussion about adding an additional, it seems like we could look at that, but they really are responsible for providing us with a budget, what it costs to operate their library, and that includes those things. And then we divide that into the number of, unfortunately, the formula requires us to divide that into the number of items they've distributed. But that starts with them providing us with a budget that is reasonable and covers all their costs. And then we are able to use our taxing authority to provide that. So I just think that I'm going to support this too, but I think that Andrew just needs to find time in his life to do it, to become a better, more familiar with library finances, I guess.
I will work on that in my free time. Yeah.
Please. But Mr. Chairman, would you like a motion on this?
No, we gotta do that later. Yep. I had a question I don't remember what it was. It caught me off there now. I'll think about this. Yeah, that's down later on. Yeah, it is. Right. Now, we really haven't decided, we could go less, we could go, but we have to decide what we're gonna do with this first, then we'll bring it down to the next motion. So any more discussion, but I mean, we're still in a discussion stage. We could go less. And as far as I know, last month, we decided the contingency fund was out, right? So now it's a budget adjustment, right?
The contingency fund is not out. It got replenished at the beginning of the,
No, I meant out of this discussion because we kind of decided we're gonna do a budget adjustment, not go the contingency fund. Did we agree to that last, maybe I don't remember. We could still go that route.
you can still
Yeah,
go that route.
I know we said that
Yep.
we weren't gonna do that, but we
Is
still
there
could. It's still on the
recommendation
table,
from
yeah.
Administration that we do a budget adjustment?
My thought from that we're in the beginning of the year, and and there was not a lot of time urgency to this matter. I felt like we could go through a full budget process and bringing this through there. You can certainly bring it to a contingency request out. Yes, that is up to the.
If
up
that
to the
happens,
committee.
that decides right here now and then it's done, right? We don't have to
It
go-
goes to the Committee on Administration. The Committee on
Oh, yeah, yeah, I
Administration
bet,
would
yeah.
make the final determination.
But it
with
wouldn't
the-
go to the full
With a
board.
budget adjustment, it would go to the full board, correct? And require a 2/3
2/3
vote.
vote, yeah.
So, given that, and trying to be conservative with our contingency fund, is there anything that would stop us from splitting that out of both sources? So like say half through contingency, half through general?
So the major difference between the two of them, first of all, is the vote and who gets to decide. And the other one is, so the contingency fund is probably a quicker option. I mean, this certainly could qualify for a contingency fund. And it was just purely the fact that it is February, and as long as they have this funding before December, they're fine. So the urgency to the matter didn't seem to be there for me. That was really the big difference. As far as what the money is in the end, it's the same general fund that's paying for it. So the source of the money is technically the same. It's really the mechanism to get it approved.
So if somebody who does want to make a motion to, for any amount, I guess.
Just a
I-
good discussion.
Microphone.
You making-
turn your
No.
Yeah, that. There.
There.
Just to, start the discussion of the actual motion, I would move that we, to support the resolution as presented to us in the document here and, have a discussion as to whether we want to amend or change that in any way.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. We have a second,
1 second.
seconded by Supervisor Burnt. Any further discussion? Now we can discuss on what we want to do here.
Go ahead.
I just had a question for Dan. So what would happen if the contingency fund got completely depleted for the end of the year?
That depends on if it was needed after it was
Well,
depleted.
okay, so suppose it's depleted and something
yeah.
comes up and we need money, right? Like we're just out of luck, or is an alternative to kind of do what we're doing now, like go to
Correct.
the full board, do a budget adjustment, right?
Yeah, so
not-
it's really the urgency.
Okay, I see.
So it can happen a lot faster.
Mhm.
There's a committee on admin meeting next Wednesday, theoretically, or Thursday. If you wanted to do that right now, we could get it in the agenda and have it completed on Thursday.
Right.
If it were whereas at the county board, well,
Mhm.
it's too late to update the agenda right now.
Right.
So,
So then on the other hand, like the risk that we'd be running is, so say the fund gets depleted and we need money quickly in November, right? Then we no longer have the ability to go through the committee administration, right? So that's the risk.
right, yeah, and we don't
Yeah.
have a December county board meeting, so it
Yeah.
would be an emergency meeting of the county board.
Okay, all right. That seems worth
We
avoiding.
could do a budget adjustment anytime during the year and pull funds out of the general fund, right? So if we knew that in October that there's going to be unexpected expense in December, the board would have to do that, obviously, but
Yeah.
okay. My only hesitation is, this is a confusing topic. And You know, I just don't know whether it's, and there are reasons, I think, to try and mitigate any sort of, um, feelings between the boards that are out there. We want to try and, if we can, do this in a way that maintains good relationships between them. And requiring it to come to the full board for a 2/3 vote. I don't know that people are, this kind of discussion is going to happen with everybody at that board in order for them to understand it. And that's a difficult discussion to have. It's only $5,000. Our contingency fund is what, 150? Or
I always forget it. 125?
it went down already, okay. So,
It didn't go down. I probably misstated it before.
yeah, anyway, so I thought it was 125. It's a manageable amount of money to take out of there, even though it is early in the year. And if we do end up needing more, then we can have this discussion. But if we don't, I guess I'm inclined to vote for I'm inclined to amend the resolution to have it be a contingency fund request and retain the $5,000. But if somebody else feels differently about that, I'm open to discussion of that.
I guess, Andy, my question was, obviously this has never happened before, because otherwise we'd had this all figured out before, so the chance of happening in the future again, maybe if we do a better job, it won't happen, it's never happened before. I don't know if it was COVID or whatever happened here, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe I misspoke and said I didn't do a good job. I think I did an excellent job, but I think I could just provide additional information going forward about a year-over-year comparison. You're right, we haven't dealt with this in I don't think a number of years. In fact, we didn't even research if it had happened prior. But yeah, it could happen again in the future. But if we try to mitigate it earlier on, like when we first have this discussion about funding in July for the next year's budget, I think that would help mitigate some of these concerns.
I just want to check, did you make a motion or an amendment?
To amend, yes.
You-
There was a motion on the floor. Tom made it, Spencer seconded it.
No.
So he's
Oh, yeah.
amending it.
For the
Now he's
correct one.
amending.
Yeah, we
He's
need a
a
second.
Yeah, so you need a second.
Mark seconded the original one.
The
I
written,
seconded the original motion.
yeah,
You-
yeah, yeah.
You need a second of the amendment.
I know, okay.
Yeah, we're still in discussion, I guess. That's
Right.
what we're doing
You,
here.
you, you,
Need a
you,
second.
you need a second before you get to
Well, I just
discuss.
asked a question, I guess, yeah. All right,
Now we have to.
Oh, well, I'd like to second
the amendment
the amendment that Tom proposed
to go to the contingency fund.
to pay for it through the contingency fund. yes.
Okay,
Got that, Deanna? Okay.
I warned her yesterday
I-
when we put it on the agenda.
all right, we have a first and a second to amend the motion to go to with the contingency fund and not the budget adjustment. We have a vote, all in favor?
Aye.
I
Then, well, now we'll have to go down,
So you approve the amendment
yep,
and now you're back to the original
Yeah.
motion
okay,
With the amendment.
with the,
the amendment. So discussion is over, now I'm gonna read that one more time here then, and are we done with talking about this?
You can talk about it.
Yeah, once I read it once, then you can't do any more about it, right? That's the way we do it?
You can do.
Okay. All right, the motion is, to use the $5,000 out of the contingency fund for 2025. Is that right?
And I think you probably would, what we would say, here's the written motion, that we would approve the motion as presented with the
Oh.
amendment that it be taken out of the contingency fund. And then we have that.
Oh, not right. I think we got, That sound right, Dan? I guess I don't know how these new Robert rules are gonna work here. It's a-
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yep. Right. I think the important part is Deanna knows. And well, and everybody that's voting.
Okay.
So,
but then it was amended. Got it. Okay, all in favor?
I,
Opposed? Motion carries for the contingency, 2025 contingency fund for $5,000 to the Colfax Library. Yeah. All right, any announcements? Anybody got any announcements? Next meeting is Tuesday, March 18th, 4:30 in room 60.
We're gonna,
54.
we're gonna be meeting in this room again, for tax appointments. Also for April, that's something we haven't moved yet, but it may be a possibility that it's also going to be in this room as well instead of 60, but that will be on the agenda for that month as well, as I'll make sure to include it in email.
Okay. All right.
Still got time to vote.
An hour and 54 minutes to vote.
No further discussion, meeting adjourned.